Talk a little about that horrible night in June of '72. Bernie, thanks much.
Sure, yeah. And if there had never been a flood, and we all wish there hadn't been, but if there had never been a flood, Don Barnett would be a great South Dakota figure and leader. He was a very, very young fella when he was elected mayor of Rapid City. Democrat, I might even say. I don't know how that all happened. Maybe we can ask him about that later. But we had this very young mayor who presided over, I guess clearly the most awful, horrific night in the history of South Dakota. 238 people killed, millions and millions of dollars of property damage, the heart of the city just gutted. And I can't imagine what it was like. But Don today lives in Colorado, but he's a South Dakotan at heart. He's been a longtime reader of South Dakota Magazine. And Don, thanks for joining us.
Well, I'm very proud to be here, and you've been a great advocate through your publication. I tell you, the happiest day of the month for me is when I get the South Dakota Magazine. It just touches on those smaller towns, and it hits the heartbeat of South Dakota and makes me homesick every time I read it.
Oh, well, thank you. Appreciate that a lot. Thank you, Don. Well, tell us what on June 9th, and I'm sure it's just burned in your memory. What's the first thing you remember? The morning was a cool, muggy morning, as I understand, cloudy, and rain was forecast. Did you have any idea that anything like that?
It really wasn't like that, Bernie. I'm very happy to set the stage, and that's what we're going to do when we have this commemoration program on June 8th, 9th, and 10th in Rapid City this about a month from now. We will be recalling exactly what happens, and in my opening comments at this big convocation, the title of my remarks are A City on the Launch Pad. Rapid City was really raring to go. We had just passed the taxation measure to build the long-delayed Rapid City Convention Center and Sports Arena and Fine Arts Auditorium. Every mayor since World War II had promised that, and now we had the taxation to do it, and there was a spirit of optimism in the community. That morning, it was a bright morning. It was not cloudy or anything else. It was going to be a wonderful Friday, and we had the first organizational meeting of our nonprofit corporation to build the Civic Center, and we had hired an attorney, and we were set then to move ahead as rapidly as we could with getting an architect, and we hired the Spitznagel firm out of Sioux Falls. They were wonderful. We were all set to go. And then that evening, about 5 o'clock, the airplane pilots and the weather service started calling in and said there were just gigantic, humongous, just terribly large clouds all over the Black Hills. But then the Weather Bureau said, but there's no wind. There's no wind. Those clouds are going to hang there all night. And consequently, the airline pilots and the military pilots and the private pilots began to get real concerned, and they called the landing tower there at Rapid City, and the Weather Bureau began to issue these warnings about 5 o'clock that unless we had some wind, those clouds were going to hang in those canyons and drip, drip dry, and boy, that's what happened. But it started to rain about 6 o'clock, and about 6:30 up by Pactola Reservoir. There's 17 miles of creek between Pactola and the city limits of Rapid City, and consequently it started to rain, and there weren't any winds, and those clouds were just gigantic, Bernie. And all of a sudden they began to just drip dry, and consequently we had one of the worst flooding disasters in the history of America. Grant, there are two big mega floods in American history. One is the Johnstown, Pennsylvania flood in the year 1890, and that killed over 2,000 people when a dam gave way and flooded an entire village. But this one in 1972, we didn't have a dam fail, but we didn't have any winds to blow those clouds all over South Dakota and Wyoming, and so consequently 238 perished, and Rapid City is still the second largest river or stream type of flood in the United States. And from there on, the entire summer, and I might add the rest of my term in public life, was recovering from that terrible disaster.
Don, where were you at when you first knew that, we're in serious trouble? What do you remember about that the first time that you thought, oh, God help us, because we are in serious trouble?
Well, I was called by the police department because I'd been swimming at the YMCA with my wife and daughters, and I said very sternly to my wife, I said, Joanne, now please go home and please stay there. I don't think I can worry about you tonight. And she said, well, I understand. and we hustled the kids into the car, and she drove them home, and I took the city car, and we went out on the west side of town, and there was a caretaker who lived in the beautiful Canyon Lake Park, and he was a city employee and was provided housing there so he could be a security force there within the park in case there was trouble, and we forced him to leave his home. And holy mackerel, we went around on the highway and we looked at Canyon Lake, and it was just filling up with debris and car bodies. And I immediately went to the nightclub there, the old Canyon Lake Club, and I used the telephone, and I put out the warning. And we tried to have as much warning as possible, but within an hour or so, the radio stations and the TV stations lost their power, and the water got much, much higher. And then about 11:30 or so, Canyon Lake, the dam broke, and there was a great surge of water. But then about 3 or 4 in the morning, the highest waters came roaring through the city and destroyed about 2,000 housing units, totally destroyed about 1,500. And we had casualties among the fire department and the police department and the public works employees. And the National Guard was fortunately there. They did a wonderful job of pulling people out of the creek all night long. And a lot of volunteers from Ellsworth Air Force Base just put on their helmets and went into Rapid City. And they were helping our firemen and doing everything they could do. And 7 brave officers and airmen from Ellsworth were killed trying to save others that night. It was just the damnedest thing you ever saw.
What would if it was such an unfortunate thing, but so fortunate that the National Guard was training there, and then obviously Ellsworth was right miles away. Without those forces, I mean, what would you have done?
Oh my goodness, I don't know. I'm sure the number of deaths would probably been closer to 400 than 238. The National Guard never sought any glorification or anything, but they were wonderful South Dakota people from every neighborhood in South Dakota. There were literally hundreds of them in Rapid City, and they didn't wait to be told. They got their bulldozers and their cranes and their operators and their trucks and their discipline, and they went down by the river with ropes and chains, did everything they could to help people all night long, and the Air Force people came into town and worked like mad. I tell you, if we would not have had the military and our wonderful firemen and policemen, I'm sure the death toll would have been a lot closer to 400. And as it was just knocked South Dakota right to our knees. And there's an article in the paper here in a few days. I said that all of South Dakota wept, and all of South Dakota was filled with terrible sadness when we knew that 3 of those brave leaders and strong men in the National Guard were killed.
And it was obviously your policemen, your firemen, and if you read the articles in South Dakota Magazine this issue, first-person accounts, almost every account of the survivors talks about seeing a guardsman, a serviceman, a policeman out there, where they were trying to escape. They were running into the flood, trying to help others. And one particular person wrote about how a Forest Service employee saw her signal and attached a tow rope to her car. He tried to tow her to safety. The rope snapped, and she said she survived, but she said the last thing she saw was his taillights, and then he was gone. That he was never seen again.
Yeah, there's
numerous accounts of that about how when everybody else was running away from the flood, they were running into it to help people.
That's exactly right. That's a good old South Dakota spirit. South Dakota always has a great heart. When you take a look, Bernie and Grant, when you think about the history of this, it's just amazing. And I am a student of South Dakota history, and I'm proud to serve on the board of the South Dakota Hall of Fame, and we try to find South Dakota's most historic people that have made the largest contribution to the history of our state and the development. And there were 2 tragedies, just absolute, sad, monumental tragedies in the history of our wonderful state. And the first tragedy was the Wounded Knee Massacre, which did not have to happen, and it's a tragic blot on South Dakota history forever. It was way back in 1890. And then also there is the Rapid City flood in 1972. And between those 2, there are about 600.